you go. You're good.
Good. There we go. I can hear it now. Okay. Sort of like picking up right where we left off, what I want to do in this next section is just talk to you about a gospel culture, which is a way to sort of, I think, go into this culture that is post-Christian. What do we actually do as a church? What practical things can we cultivate and create to make that happen? The general idea that I think you have to have going into this is right away you've got to change your metrics. You got to change how you think about success and what you're doing as a church. And here's what I practically mean. This is just Los Angeles. In the last 2 years, here's what I know. Bel Air Pres, which is a long-standing church that I've had a good relationship with, Ronald Reagan was a member there, has had to lay off half their pastoral staff. Vintage Church, it's a sort of Anglican charismatic church in West LA, had to lay off 30% of their staff. Ecclesia was a church in Hollywood, 1,500 people before COVID, big staff. Now down to about 80 or 100 people, one pastor. Another church in North Hollywood in the Valley called Radius. This is very Southern California. Like you just have to, create a name like this. Radius. Over 1,000 people involved before COVID. This past January, just closed the church. What we're dealing with in terms of involvement, in terms of attendance, in terms of connection, has drastically changed over the last 2 years. I have not asked anyone here what the attendance was like before and now afterwards. But, my friends in Nashville have just said over and over again, where are a lot of the people that were here beforehand and have not come back? And there's some frustrating ways to think about this, but another way to think about it is you've just got to change the metric of ministry. And that you've got to think about impact, and what you're doing is not just to fill a seat and to fill pews and to have, like, how many people were there on Sunday, and why is it down, what are we not doing right? But it's time to just change your paradigm and say, what are our ministry goals in terms of impact, in terms of kingdom influence, in terms of things happening that's beyond just the Sunday worship service. And having encouragement and excitement about things that happen that don't just impact you. So a couple ideas let's talk about. And I really do want to be more interactive in this section. So if you have questions in the middle, please stop me, but I really will try to give plenty of time for Q&A. But first, you have to start really telling yourself that you are a ministry and not a club. Now, what do I mean? Well, a club exists only for its members. I've got several friends who are members of some pretty fancy country clubs in LA. And every time I go there, it's always humiliating how well they're treated, and then how the staff looks at me and is like, oh, you again. Like they just go to my friend, Mr. Charles, what can I get you something to drink? Do you need your clubs? Do you need your shoes signed? And they look at me like, there's water in the bucket over there. It exists for the members. And understandably so. He pays an incredible amount of money to be a member there. But the guests, I am a definite second-class citizen there. What a ministry does is it says, look, we definitely care for our people. We love, we shepherd, we resource our people, but we do lots of things that exist and impact people and things we will never see or touch. That is, we give money, we invest, we do things for people not so that they will begin to come to our worship service, not so that they will begin to be a part of what we're doing, but we do it because we're just a ministry of Jesus Christ. And we love the city of Macon, and we want to see this become more like heaven and less like hell. So we're just going to invest and do things this way. A ministry does stuff for people who are not involved, don't give anything back, and don't even share the same values. That's what a ministry will do. And it tells people that you can belong here before you believe. So imagine this. Imagine your neighbors are people that you get to know. None of them go to church. But there are things that you can do for them. Like, let's say, I'm putting pressure on you, Elliot. Let's just say Elliot gave 10 people here a $250 budget and said, I just want you to throw a neighborhood gathering and just love and bless your neighbors. And those people are like, why are you doing this? Is this like a bait and switch thing so that you'll cook me food and then you're going to slip an invitation for, a Christmas Eve underneath it? And it's like, no, I just want to be a great neighbor and love you. Ministries do those kinds of things. They just, I'm just here to love you and bless you and be a part of your life just because this is what we think Jesus wants us to do for our city. Second thing I think you've got to begin to do is you, in this phase of ministry, train non-elder leaders. Clearly, you should not stop trying to raise up elders in this church. Don't ever quit pursuing that. Try to get as many as you can. Disciple people with that goal in mind. But more than that, you've got to acknowledge that the elder calling is also a gift that not everybody is gifted for. And that just because you're not gifted for that does not mean you cannot be a significant leader in the church. And here's why you have to begin to do that. Is because I think going forward, our paradigm of ministry has got to switch this way. For the longest time, we have had a philosophy of ministry in the church that says, hey, we are reaching people with the gospel, with our sort of efforts to do these things. And when we get you, we will equip you. And that was actually a fantastic philosophy of ministry for a long time. The problem is, what I've tried to argue with you for the last 2 sessions, is I don't think we're reaching those people anymore. I can just tell you, like your neighbor does not want to have a one-on-one with Elliot. They don't want to invite Justin into their backyard to just come hang out with them. They're not interested in just going on a blind date lunch with Chip and pouring out their life. But they're your neighbor. They will be interested in talking and hanging out with you. And what that means is that the best way for this church to begin to reach people is actually not through the pastoral staff, but through people in this room. And honestly, I actually think this is the philosophy and the pattern that Paul lays out for us in Ephesians 4. When he gives his unpacking of the spiritual gifts and the roles in the church, he says God gave some to be apostles, evangelists, teachers, so that they can equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And what he says in that text is that actually the saints will be the ones who do the work of the ministry. And actually, what the elders and the officers of the church do is spend their time equipping people for that to be able to happen. So that here's what you begin to believe. You begin to stop thinking that the church is like your gardener. You treat your gardener as you're like, your yard's a mess. It needs to be mowed. There's leaves everywhere. You hire somebody, they come and do this work for you. They clean it up, and then you're like, thank you so much. I so appreciate you. here's some money, and then you go back to your life. That's how most Americans treat their church. But what you begin to think is actually that it's my job to find a role here. And what the pastor's here to do, I need them in my life because I need them to help me go reach people at my workplace. I need them to help me have skills so that I can get people on my neighborhood block interested in a Bible study. And I think pastorally what this looks like is that you begin to think is your main role is equipping people. That if you're an officer and an elder, you ought to have ministries with this idea. There's always somebody up at the bat, there's always somebody on deck, and there's always somebody in the hole. That what you're doing is not just what you're doing, but you are training somebody else to do what you're passionate about. And you've got somebody who you're already starting to think could be able to do that. And then you're identifying somebody who one day I think they would be really gifted and good at this church with. If you have a role in this church right now, you ought to always have that on your radar. Hey, who can I equip in this church that would be powerful in this city to go do something? Because this is, you've got to believe this about your pastors. They went to seminary for a reason. And part of it was because they were not good at anything else. But you know what? You are. And that means that your neighbors and coworkers and friends are interested in your gifts and your abilities to do these things. If you have a heart for that, go to them and say, please, give me some knowledge, give me some skills, give me some opportunities to begin to do that. But you begin to think about the best way for Macon to be reached is that training leaders and people to do things who are never going to be elders, who are never going to be at session meetings, is one of the main things that you do in this church. 3, we talked about this last night, but create a new front door for the church. As reverse your model of ministry. If you weren't here last night, here's what I basically said in a nutshell. How we thought about ministry for the longest time in the churches is we have a worship service. It's like First Pres, 500 people or 700 people. And there's a lot of people here today that we don't want you to get lost in the cracks. We don't want you to be disconnected. We don't want you to be just a consumer. And one of the best ways for you to get involved is that you actually join a small group. And that has been great, but that assumes that the entry door for people is the worship service. And that assumes that what we need to do is actually just doctor that up, make that more attractive, make that more engaging for people who are not involved in the church so that they can have an easier time accessing what we're doing. Those are more and more and more becoming obsolete. Look, I'm speaking at this conference. I love the marketing. We should do it. But do you know how marketing comes across your city? It comes across like a tweet. A tweet is if you already politically agree with that, you know what you do? You retweet it. And you're like, this is amazing. Absolutely. If somebody tweets something and you already hate it, you're never convinced of that. You're never like, oh, well, I never thought about that before. You go, what an idiot, block, forget you, throw it away. That's how non-believers see everything that you're putting out on social media and stuff. You should still do it. You still have to have a social platform. But what I mean is that kind of marketing, that kind of stuff assumes that how we're reaching you is we just need to market like our worship service and this platform where people will see stuff and then want to come on their own. That's not how they want to come. They want to come through very particular things. And here's why you got to do this, is there's a social barrier and a spiritual barrier. Look, the social barrier is that people who are not Christians do not trust Christians. And the main social barrier for them coming to your church, like they will not see the sign out front. Or they will not see the thing on Instagram, or they will not see the thing on the website and come on their own. Not because you're not doing it well, not because you're not saying the right things, it's because they don't trust you. And they socially are afraid to get involved in this environment on their own and feel like they're walking into something that is going to hurt them. Now, not just people who are apatheists, not just people who are sort of deconstructing their faith. I'm talking believers as well. I just had a kid who, born and raised in Nashville, came to USC for 4 years. I spent tons of time with him. He was in a fraternity, really kind of came alive in his faith through RUF. Just moved back to Nashville. And he told me he wants to get involved in a church. So he graduated in May. I texted him in August, and I said, hey, what church are you going to? He's like, I haven't gone to one yet. Almost 4 months later. So I'm like, what do you need? I was like, do you need somebody personal? He said, yes. So here's what I had to do, is I had to contact a particular church of people I knew, and I had to do a text thread with 4 people, and I'm like, hey, this is so-and-so, meet my friend so-and-so. He just moved back to Nashville. He wants to get involved in your church. Can you please plug him in and connect him? So what happened is they actually had to go to lunch, meet him, and said, if you come on Sunday, I'll be there. He finally went. Look, even for committed Christians, they more and more have to have those kinds of things where there's a relationship established, that you feel like somebody who, if I show up to this thing, I can come sit next to you. Because look, again, the technology, do you know why you get on a bus or why you sit in an airport and everybody's just on their phone? It's not because the phone is so interesting. It's because you're so scary. I mean, like if you sit down on a plane and somebody says, hey, how are you? You're like, I really got this ticket. It's unbelievable how socially anxious we are in 2022. Like talking to a stranger just sounds like the worst idea anybody has ever contrived. And while I loathe that and wish there was a way back, let's just be honest, and we've got to enter into that. And say, if that's the case, then what that means is we've got to have avenues around Macon where people can make relationships so that they can get involved in our church. I'll give you some ideas. We've done this in LA, and it's worked very well. Social clubs. At our church, we did this. We had, I know this is ironic in light of what I said, we had a golf club. We had a hiking club. We had a movie club, we had a Dodger club, and what that would look like is, so for the golf group, it would be a group of guys in the church who all love golf, and once a month they would get together and go play. And so what happened is if you had a friend who you wanted to come to the church, one of the best ways to get him involved is to bring him to that. And you meet these guys, and you play golf with them for 4 hours. And if they're spiritually interested, it's like, hey, you should come to our church. These guys all go there, and they'll all be a part of that. Now, when they play golf, it's not like in the middle of the hole. It's like, okay, guys, it's noon. Break out your Bibles. We're going to do our daily psalm. You just play golf. The Dodger Club is like everybody. They just love the Dodgers. So it's like once a month, let's just go to a game together. And if you've got a friend who's new to town, one of the best ways for them to make friends is just, hey, invite them to the game. And what happens is they build relationships there, and if they feel comfortable, they will slowly start to come to church on their own, but they know they can go and see people there who they will feel comfortable and say, I can sit next to them. I can go talk to them. I can feel like maybe a little bit I belong. Just creating something where people can make natural relationships so that somebody who's not in the church can come to it, feel like they know a face, they know a name, they can get connected, and if they're invited to an avenue of ministry, they can show up and not feel socially scared. It may sound like kindergarten-esque, but that's ministry in 2022. Neighborhood gatherings. Becky and I have done this. Fortunately, we live on a cul-de-sac. But we've done this with our neighbors several times. We just pull a grill out in the middle of the cul-de-sac and just start cooking meat, and you just knock on the door and we give them heads up. But we just have a cookout, and the families come out, and we just kind of sit out in the cul-de-sac. The kids are riding scooters everywhere, playing chase, basketball in the cul-de-sac, and we just sit out in the front yard and eat and hang out for several hours. And what happens is we get to know one another. We start telling stories. What do you do for a living? And you gulp and say, I'm a pastor. And then that's a different conversation of, oh, okay, what is that like? Rather than like an email. Do things where you can naturally get to know people, where they begin to trust you. I mean, ideally what we're saying is grow the walls of your church beyond Sunday morning. And what this means is the metrics of what you're doing, that First Pres is touching people who may not come to church for 4 or 5 years. Look, part of the way that you ought to think about ministry in a post-Christian world is what can we do now with people so that when their life inevitably goes through something hard in 3 years, they will think First Pres is a great place to deal with that. Because almost everybody you know in the next 20 years is going to go through something really hard and tragic. And very few of them will have a place to turn to. But you can sow kingdom seeds now in just simple social gatherings, in simple things, so that they begin to go, hey, if something happens to our kids, I remember those people at First Pres. They were friendly. They reached out to us, and you may be the only thing that they can turn to. You got to start pressing back against that social barrier. You also got to press back against the spiritual barrier. Look, if people have not been involved in a church before, you got to know this. Singing is weird. Like, do you know of another gathering in America where people get together just to sing? No. At best, we pay somebody to sing to us. But there's no gathering of people who get together and decide to joyfully sing songs. That is a very weird social experience. And asking people for that to be their first spiritual encounter is ignorant. Now, what people discover after a while is, why do you sing? Why do you do this? It's because God is so beautiful. And what he's done is so life-transforming, it's almost like there aren't words to describe it, so we just sing. But that is a process that does not happen in one moment. It takes a development to get there. The other spiritual barrier is that inviting someone into a church, especially with a liturgy like you have, in some ways feels like going to a yoga class or an exercise class for the first time. You know why most people don't do that for the first time? Because they don't want to be that idiot in the class who's like, what do we do now? When everybody just knows what's going on and you're the one who doesn't know what's going on. That is terrifying. And the early church actually already dealt with this. Robert Jensen, in his Systematic Theology, almost has this passing comment where he talks about the catechumene. And what that is that in the early church, the Greco-Roman world was so pagan that when they wanted to get them involved in the church. They had no Jewish categories. They had no categories of sacrifice. They had no categories really of a priest. They had no categories of the Hebrew Scriptures. So what they created were people who were open to the gospel, these like pre-church schools that met with people who were not involved in the normal community of faith, but gave them some sort of gentle categories so that when they came into worship, when they came into the practice and life of the church, they had at least sort of a blank canvas that the elders and the minister could begin to paint on. Look, there's so many people in Macon who probably believe there is a God, have no idea what a call to worship is. And when you confess your sins, have never, like maybe they've never done that, or have not done that in a functional way in 20-something years. There are things you could do about that. One thing that we did in California is we did these things called Exploring Jesus dinners. What that was is as you began to realize people who were spiritually interested in your life, it was 6 weeks of asking them if they would be interested in committing to this. What you would do is somebody would host, like every Thursday night at our house, we're going to come and we're going to eat a nice dinner together. And usually the church would give money to be able to pay for a good meal. And after we eat and spend time together, we're going to go through this curriculum. If you've not seen the curriculum, Christianity Explored, that comes out of Britain, it's a fantastic curriculum introducing people to Jesus through the Gospel of Mark. It's not the only one out there, but it is a very effective one that I've seen. And offering them 6 weeks of looking into Jesus. And then after the 6 weeks is over, it's sort of like, okay, well, if you're interested in going further with this, here's the avenues that you can come and get involved with in our church. If you're not, we still want to be your friend, but we understand. There's a lot of people who need you to do that, so when they show up to the exercise class, they don't feel like an idiot. They don't feel lost. They don't feel strange when everybody's singing and they have no idea what to do in this moment. They don't know what to do when you're reading the Apostles' Creed and they've never heard of this before. Evangelistic small groups. I know your small groups build great relationships and deep vulnerability and community here. Have you ever thought about opening those up to unbelievers? And your neighbor who you wanted to introduce to Christianity, have you ever thought the best way to introduce them to First Pres is us and these 4 families get together in our home, and man, the best thing to expose you to is us. And you start actually living out the idea that the church is a called people defined by something, not just an architectural building. But don't ever sell this building. I mean, this is amazing. And my friend, one of my best friends in ministry, planted a church in downtown Oakland. An unbelievably secular place, like even way more secular than Southern California. And 2 years ago, they had a guy they knew at Google give them $3 million, and they bought a building that actually looks a lot like this, and their ministry is thriving. You don't need a warehouse or some cool-looking aesthetic to reach non-believers. You just need to make them feel welcome and safe, and it usually starts outside there before they come in here. You got to change the front door to it. Okay, let me. I'm just going to stop there. Questions? There's more we could say on some of those things, but
I'm gonna take pastor privilege first, if I can. I have the microphone, so I can. Anyway, you may not have any firsthand knowledge of this, but a lot of what you said last night and this morning, You've made specific applications for us where we are culturally, politically. But a lot of what you've said has reminded me of things that I've heard about ministry to Muslims over the last 20 years. Do you see any parallel? And there's other people groups, but after 9/11, for about 10 years there, that was a big topic. How do we preach the gospel to Muslims? And I know a lot of things that I've heard before is if you have a Muslim community that you can build a relationship with, the relationship has to be built first. You can't just start talking. I've heard missionaries and other ministry leaders say you can't just start talking about Jesus. Do you see any parallels like that? Do you know of any missionaries, domestic or global?
Yeah, I've not had a long history or much experience with Muslims in ministry, but what I've seen and understand tracks very much with what you're saying, where especially the American church and Muslims, what that immediately begins with is a truckload of stereotypes. That once actually people sit down and talk, you begin to realize most of our stereotypes that you have about them and definitely they have about you are wrong. And there are things that you actually will find very refreshing to talk to them about. Like when you talk to a Muslim, it's so different than talking to a secular white person who can't fathom that there's a God of justice who has hell. Muslims are like, you better believe I'm for that. And there's tons of stuff that they already agree with you on in sort of a worldview way that make it easier. But they are so, this is what is so beautiful about Christianity, and we have to also acknowledge. Christianity is the only worldview that really is multicultural. Like what Pentecost does is it comes in and it actually reverses the Tower of Babel. And it says, you do not have to be Jewish in order to believe this. Because what the text says is it actually says, in their own native tongue, they began to declare the works of God. So, you look in the history of the church, it's amazing. Here's something that started in the Middle East. They ended up grow incredible influence in Western Europe, then migrated in a tremendous way to the East Coast, and then began to have tremendous influence in South America. In the last 25 years, they estimate there's almost 20 million Episcopalians in Central Africa. And they think that by 2050, there'll be more Christians in China than anywhere else in the world. And what you sort of see, if you trace all that stuff, is how the gospel does not get contained by one culture, and doesn't make you change cultures in order to become a Christian. Islam does. So that when you talk to a Muslim about becoming a Christian, what they think you're doing is asking them to become an American and to relinquish all of their Middle Eastern cultural ideologies. And you're not, because what the gospel does is it doesn't say, hey, leave that culture and become a part of this culture. The gospel goes into particular cultures and overturns the idols of that culture and actually upholds the beauty of each culture. And so when you sit down with them, you can begin to show them, hey, I'm not asking you to become an American. I'm not asking you to leave any of your Iran heritage. I'm asking you to change gods, which is actually harder and easier at the same time.
Hey, Alex. I'm Hannah. We met at Panera yesterday.
Good to see you again.
I was with Marianne. I hope this question doesn't fall flat, and it might. A lot of what you've talked about with building relationships with non-believers outside of the church in order to then eventually bring them in resonates a lot with a book that our small group, our young adult women small group, just did in the spring. And the book is The Simplest Way to Change the World, Biblical Hospitality as a Way of Life. Have you read this book by any chance? Because a lot of what you said is in this book.
No. Who wrote it?
It's by Dustin Willis. So I was hoping that you would have said yes, because I was going to ask you, just as an RUF minister and as a pastor, if you might recommend that book to our church, to people who want to learn how to do relational ministry outside of the church.
Well, if you're saying it's, he and I would say the same thing, then yes.
Okay. Do you have any books or resources that you know of and that you recommend for people who want to learn how to do relational ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm like the worst person to ask about this, because I almost feel like you have to read like 25 books, but you should only read these 30 pages in that book in order to find stuff. And there's a lot of significant literature out there that I think speaks to some of these things in different ways, but this is just real anecdotal, real quick, like the Master Plan of Evangelism. Very well-read. Man, about 40 to 50% of that book is tremendously helpful. But then there's like 50% of that book I would really not like and agree with. And Jerram Barr's like Heart of Evangelism has some incredible stuff, but in some ways to me is impractical. You just kind of put those things together. I mean, one of the things with hospitality, I did not say this, is as you do this, you have to engage people without the agenda that it's unto something else. Like, people are so suspicious today. They know if you're doing this for something else. And so in some ways what it is almost having an impulse to how God is at work in people's lives and catching up to that. So that we're willing to care for people and be hospitable and friends with people who may never, ever, ever, come to our church. James Kennedy used to use the language, drop the net. And what he meant was, Jesus calls us to be fishers of men. And Kennedy said, there's a lot of people who will, say, I'm looking for fish. But he would say, but you never drop the net. And, man, there are friends in my life who it's like, I almost did that the first time we met. And then there are people who, I don't know if I did that in 10 years of being friends with them. And maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong, but some of it was like, I just needed to have the impulse of like, I think if I did this right now, it would feel like I'm pulling out a life insurance policy on the golf course. And they would just do this, not cool. And then sometimes it was like, this was right in step with how God was at work. I wish there was a book that just unpacked that, but I haven't read it yet.
I'll just keep asking questions. I hear you talk about our church does this clubs. We do this dinner thing. You're talking about your church does these clubs. You have this dinner thing, Christianity Explored. I'm actually trying to do that here on Wednesday night, so
yeah.
Thank you for plugging that. How do your people make the margin in their life to be involved with these things? Because they're organic, they're on the timetable of other people.
Yeah.
Because I imagine this is like, my life is very busy. I know so many other people's lives are very busy.
Yeah.
And there's like, oh, those are great ideas. I literally have 0 hours a week to do any of that.
Yeah.
I don't even have the time to make friends with non-Christians.
Okay.
Maybe send us in a direction.
Okay, a couple comments on this that will maybe just add to the tension a little bit. People who say they have no time are not honest with themselves in life. So I know a lot of people in here love the Masters golf tournament. Do you know how that tournament runs? It runs with 10,000 volunteers. One of my, I was a student, his dad and I became good friends, his donor, Dr. Topper Doring. His wife's birthday is always around Masters Week, and he's volunteered the last 10 years. You know what that means? It means he was so passionate about this thing, and he's so passionate about it happening. He's definitely willing. He's the chief medical officer at this hospital in Indianapolis. It's totally worth his vacation to take off and volunteer for a week of just standing there and like pointing out golf balls. He gets paid nothing. He doesn't have a significant thing. Nobody is there is like, well, this couldn't have never happened without Dr. Doring. Nobody knows he's there. Like, if you are passionate about something, you always have time for it. That being said, all of you moms with young children, I understand you have no time for it. But here's one of the beauties. Those of you who are empty nesters, I had breakfast with a dear friend last August, and she turned 60. And I'll just tell you what she said. She looked at me, almost kind of biting her lip. She said, you know, when you turn 60, it feels like nobody's interested in what you have to say anymore. That is a lie. We are so interested in what you have to say. And you have actually lots more time. Lots more free time. And there are lots of young people in this town whose dads did not talk to them and did not have a relationship with them, and whose moms were distant, and they would love to come to your house for dinner. They would love to be involved in your life. Those of you who are single, you have all the time in the world. Go hang out. Go get plugged in. Make friends and involve them this way.
So one thing that Alex has not said, but he says all the time, is that basically, I mean, whether you're a mom of young children or you do feel like you're at your margins, it's basically live your life and invite people to come along with you. I mean, that's as simple and as practical, and they're not always going to say yes. So you just keep living your life and you keep inviting them to come along and live life with you. And that's as organic as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, you've done an amazing job with this, where it's also like, you know, life is in phases too, where you planted seeds. Like, you have more time now than you did when our kids were all, like Monroe was still in the home. And you still don't have tons of time, but you have more time than you did then. And your relationships are more flourished now because of the small seeds you planted when you didn't have as much time. So. Are you raising your hand?
Is there a hand? Is there a hand?
I thought somebody was raising their hand. Sorry.
Yeah.
Would it be overly simplifying things to say that in one sense your message is, in terms of the messiness of culture, it's appreciating where people are right now, and perhaps the predominant tendencies are, as you're saying, to isolation, anxiety, so forth, and respecting the call to enter into the messiness of laying down our own anxieties at the cross to enter into the anxieties of others, to be vulnerable to their anxieties as well, to share in those and plant those seeds of ministering in their anxieties at the cross, and then respecting one another according to our stages in life, where the younger members of the congregation respect that the older members have to lay aside certain things, and the older members respect that the younger members have to lay aside certain things. And there's the mutual respect that we're all laying aside anxieties and difficulties at the cross together.
Yes. I mean, You said a lot of really profound things in there. I'm in this now because it's like Gen Z. I'm in that unique year that was born where they say I'm like too young to be Gen X, too old to be a millennial. So it's like nothing applies to me. But I'm enough in touch to where I see Gen Z people and like roll my eyes. So all of you who like roll your eyes at a culture, like I starting to feel you and understand you. We're always going to have overlapping cultures in the churches that just can't fathom people doing certain things. But yeah, I mean, I think that part of what it means to be community is that you're willing to cross over, barriers. I mean, Jesus broke through political barriers, social barriers, moral barriers, every barrier to connect with somebody. That we do that for the sake of community and outreach. And I can't remember all the other things you said, but like it looks like being more concerned with reaching people than being loyal to your little cultural needs.
I'm going to ask Alex to close us here in a second, but I'll do my announcements first. If you would, remember, we need everything off the tables. If you would, you can keep the flowers if you like, but if you would bring their glass container up front here when we're done. Alex, could you just give us a snapshot of what you're preaching on tomorrow and then close us in prayer?
Tomorrow, I'm going to just preach and talk to us about sort of what it means to be aliens and strangers in this world and what God calls us to as a ministry and as a testimony and as a witness, where you are an alien and stranger and sort of practically what that looks like. So I hope to sort of leave you with this image of what can we embody and what can we be going forward for a culture that thinks we're crazy. So let me close this in prayer. Father, thanks for this morning. We do pray for great things to come from this church. Pray that there would be people in this church in 5 years who never imagined they would be in the walls of First Pres. Pray that it would come through mundane, simple things, that people who do not think that they would ever be equipped for ministry, Lord, that you would use conversations, you would use simple relationships, you would use simple things together that would help them reach people who need the gospel. Lord, be with us and grow this church for the glory of your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.